So, just like everything else, they have to come to an end, and contracts are not an exception. In this lesson, you're going to talk about discharge or termination of a contract. So when you say a contract has been discharged, we are simply saying that the contract has ended, and this can be as a result of a number of things, such as performance, agreement, frustration, breach, or even operation of the law. So let's talk about all of those. So the first one is discharge by performance, which is fairly straightforward. So in this case, the contract has come to a happy ending, okay? The parties have performed. You have supplied if you are the supplier, and the other party has paid, or whatever it is that you are contracting to do has just happened. Happy ending, rainbows and puppies, the contract is done. Now the second thing is that sometimes you end up not even wanting to do the contract. So what do? You agree to discharge the contract, which is number 2. Discharge by agreement. This can occur in a number of ways, such as accord and satisfaction. So in this case, the parties simply agree to mutually discharge each other off the contract. Okay, they have an accord, an agreement to just say, let's not do this. Okay, let's end the contract. Number 2 is rescission and substitution. What happens here is that the parties decide to substitute one contract for another. In so doing, they discharge each other off the former contract, and now they have a new contract. Number 3 is variation. Okay, variation, or sometimes they call it alteration. What happens here is that the parties decide to change some terms in a contract, and that in effect ends up terminating that contract. Okay, here's an example. Let's say you contract to supply tables, let's say 10 tables, and then what happens here is that you realize the price, or even the entire process of making 10 tables is the same as making 15 chairs. And so you call, or whatever happens is that now you have an agreement, and in that agreement you alter the terms. It's no longer tables but chairs. So if you agree to that, then what is happening here is that you've altered the contract, or you've varied the contract. In effect, you've discharged the other contract. So number 4 is a waiver, which simply means one of the parties deliberately decide to let go of their rights in a contract, and in effect ending up terminating that contract. Now, the third way in which contracts can be discharged is frustration. So in frustration, what you're saying is that the contract has been frustrated, not the parties in a contract. We can actually define frustration as events that render further fulfillment of the contract to be impossible. So frustration affects future occurrence of the contract, rather ability to continue doing the contract. There are a number of frustrating events, such as number 1, destruction of the subject matter. Okay, so what happens here is that let's say you contract to sell a car, and then the car is stolen or it's destroyed. So you no longer have the subject matter of the contract, and in so doing, the contract has been frustrated. A good example here is the case of Taylor v. Card. So you can look at that case. Number 2, incapacity or death of someone whose personal services were contemplated in that contract. So remember, death doesn't just get rid of a contract. It depends on who's dead, okay? I mean, if you contract with an artist to paint a portrait of you, so if the artist is dead, the contract is over. But if you contract a hospital, then if the doctor is dead, the hospital is still in existence. So it depends on who's dead. Number 3, non-occurrence of a specific event, okay? So here's the thing. Let's say you're one of those romantic types, and so you've arranged for you to marry your significant other in this nice room and whatever, all that, right? And then one of you decide, okay, she or he decides to call off the wedding. So what do? Do you still continue paying for that room that you're supposed to use as a room for reception? You see, the problem is that non-occurrence of that wedding simply makes the contract to use that room to be difficult, okay? It can't continue. So in fact, in this case, what is going to happen is that if you pay down payment, you're not going to get that one back anyway, but you don't have to pay any other amount of money. And number 4 is supervening illegality. So what supervening illegality simply means is that if something was legal and then it later becomes illegal to do. So let's say it was legal for you to sell certain medicine, and then the government says, from now henceforth, in order for you to sell those ones, you're going to need a special license. So if you had a contract to supply those things next week, and the rule has just been set this week, see, further fulfillment of that contract becomes impossible. In such a case, the contract has been frustrated. frustration is only going to be applicable subject to the following limitations. The first one is that it cannot override an express term in a contract. So if you state something in a contract and say this will happen no matter what, and the what here becomes a frustrating event, then the doctrine of frustration is not going to be applicable in that case. Number two, if you're going to make a loss in a contract, you cannot use frustration as an excuse. For example, if you contracted to supply something and then the prices go up, now you can't later say, well, the prices went up, that is a frustrating event, because in fact it's not. The third one is simple. Frustration should not be self-induced. And the last thing is that you cannot rely on frustration when it is something that you could have foreseen. Okay, so we'll take a break there, and then in the next video, we'll finish discharge of contracts. If you have any question, of course, let me know. And well, I'll see you in the next video where we finish discharge of contracts. Do have a lovely day.